want to give you some entirely unexpected thoughts that came to me this week as I studied again a really familiar passage in the Bible about prayer and how it connects to the world that we live in right now. And for me, I mean, you'll listen today and maybe it'll sound familiar, I don't know. But there was something new and something different this week. And it got really personal. And I'm going to tell you, sometimes there's complaining that comes from younger people that the things that I say, maybe they're too hard to understand or whatever. This is not too hard to understand today, but it will require your attention. And I promise it will apply. In the first century, like 2,000 years ago, when much of the New Testament in our Bible was written, Ephesus was this huge city, kind of the epicenter of the world, where worship for most of the Greek and Romans took place. It was very different. It was certainly very different than what the early Jews had grown accustomed to in their culture. For over 2 years, the Apostle Paul went and lived in Ephesus. It's important to understand this. He went and lived in Ephesus, and while he was there, he led many people to follow Jesus. And years later, when he was in prison, and he was put in prison for telling the story of Jesus, when he was in prison in Rome by the Romans, he writes a letter back to that group of people that he had led to Christ in Ephesus. And so when you open your Bible and you go to the book of Ephesians, that is a letter by the Apostle Paul written back to the young church in Ephesus. While he's in prison, he writes this letter back to them. And the first half of the letter, Paul writes how Jesus, this one figure, was the center of all of history. That everything about creation and everything about history comes back to connect to him. And not just about him, this letter is about his creating of a new community of followers that would include people from everywhere on earth for all time, all walks of life, different races, different socioeconomic levels, all of them would be brought together in one new community. And the book or the letter to the Ephesians is explaining to them how Jesus did this. And the second half of the letter is how they are supposed to behave. You got it? That's the letter. That's what happens. Well, in chapter 1, the very beginning of the letter, Paul writes a prayer on behalf of this young church in this city. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at one line of that prayer. One line. You can next week we'll look at a second line. of that same prayer, but you need to go and read the whole thing. There's lots of verses. It is the most inspiring, beautiful prayer I think ever written in the first chapter. But I want to point out this verse. It's really 3 verses, and then we'll get to one line. Let's look at it. It's in Ephesians chapter 1. There we go. And this is what he writes. For this reason, I do not cease giving thanks for you while making mention of you in my prayers. Now understand, he is praying a prayer on behalf of people that he knows. Probably a lot of people he doesn't know at that point, but certainly people that he knows. Making mention of you in my prayers, that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give you a spirit of wisdom and of revelation in the knowledge of him. Okay? Now that is a mouthful of church words, all wrapped up in one big fat sentence. Let me give you a shorter paraphrase of that prayer that I think accurately reflects what these lines are about. Let's read this one. I do not cease giving thanks for you, and that God may give you a spirit of wisdom and insight to know him more. And the him in this, even the word, how it's used, how it's positioned in the sentence and what we know, the him is really Jesus, to know Jesus more. I learned at a really, really young age, like young, that praying for wisdom and praying for insight, which would be even a deeper level of wisdom that where you apply the wisdom. It isn't just knowing stuff, it's knowing what to do with the stuff that you get. I learned at a really young age that praying for wisdom and insight might be one of the 2 most important prayers I could ever pray. To pray it for myself and to pray it for others. That we might gain wisdom and insight to know him more. Not simply to know what to do in the situations we find ourselves, as important as that is, but simply to pray regularly and deeply that I would know Jesus more, that I would know him better, to know his mind, to know his character, to know his priorities, to know his ways. I never walked with Jesus physically. I didn't get to see him with my own eyes. I never got to talk personally to people who did. And so the avenue, the tunnel by which we get to know Jesus deeply is by prayer, is by asking for it, to know what he would do and what he would say in any situation. Now, I realize on a practical level, some of that takes a little bit of sanctified imagination, of thinking what it would be that Jesus would say or do in this moment. But that's what I learned to pray regularly and to pray for others. I wanted to pray to become so acquainted with Jesus that my steps could naturally fall right into the indentions his footsteps were making as he walked in front of me. That's what I wanted. That's what I learned to ask for. Now here's where my week and my study got really personal in kind of an unexpected way. For any of you that know me pretty well, now there are some of you who are here today that don't know me at all, and I guess you'll have to take my word for it or ask somebody else, because I think I'm going to accurately portray who I am. I am a peacemaker, not a fighter. That is who I am. I am a red letter Christian. What I mean by that is that I learned to be an unapologetic follower of the words and the ways of Jesus as a matter of first importance in my life at a young age. It doesn't mean that I don't read the rest of the Bible and I don't, all of it is important. But there is a weight that is on my heart all the time when I read what's called the red letters in an older Bible. Those are the words that Jesus spoke. They carry weight for me. And even now, years later from when I first learned to walk in that way, you know what? I still try to do my very best to love my enemies, to turn the other cheek to my opponents, to walk by faith, to run towards the brokenness and the messes in people's lives. And get this, I have understood a calling on my life to help others follow Jesus since I was 17 years old. Now, does it make me special? No. But I'm telling you, that's where I've been. That is who I am. And that was a long time in the same direction. When you think about it, this is where you get to say, yeah, you're really old. Okay? I am. Now, with that said, I also recognize the cultural shift that has happened in my lifetime. Getting to live through 7 decades and all of the stuff that happened in all of those decades is, on one hand, it's kind of cool to be able to have had firsthand knowledge of all of those things that went on, but there is also a burden that happens when you see it. And you see the difference. You see the changes that have happened. I see how lines have been blurred. I do not live with my eyes closed and my head in the sand. I don't. Even as a peacemaker. Change, and you know this, change is happening at a rapid pace. Innocence is lost at earlier and earlier ages. I got to see it firsthand as a youth pastor for decades. And I'll tell you, these days, change just hits different. It's different, feels different, looks different. It's like truth belongs to whoever can post it on Facebook first. I win. The internet has exposed us to things we had no idea even existed and raises doubts about things we never ever dreamed of questioning. Authority is the one with the loudest voice in any given moment. As long as you can outshout your opponent, you win. Lines have been drawn. Sides are chosen. Debate, even among friends, is no longer about learning. It's about winning the debate. People don't listen to each other and try to find out how they can learn from somebody. And what's fascinating is that all sides claim righteousness. All of them. All sides claim that they are right and that they hold the answers. They know the way forward. They know that others are, at best, misguided. And at worst, they are pure evil and need to be defeated, and for some, even destroyed. I'm not telling you anything new. If your ears are just half open, I'm merely echoing things that you have heard and seen. And this is what it has come to. I hope you realize this. And it hits different for young people than it does for older people, so you'll have to sort this out a little bit. We are now living in a Christian culture that is calling us to stand up, to fight, to go to war, because we're in a spiritual battle for the minds and hearts of people that are being blinded by the enemy. We're being encouraged to take back what is ours, to stop letting depravity and indecency prevail in our institutions and in our cultural centers, in our churches and our homes. By the loudest voices in our academies and our religious media outlets, we are being told to stop compromising, stop settling, stop being apathetic, stop being defeated, and fight back. And I want to say, before you drape yourself with holy armor and pick up your sword of righteousness, and maybe before you run headfirst into the spiritual battle of your choice, you might want to stop and pray this prayer. Surprise. All of that to get to this. You might want to stop and pray this prayer. This one. A lot. Every day. Every moment of every day. Pray to know Jesus more. Because knowing Jesus intimately and doing what we believe he would have us do is what it means to walk on holy ground. And sometimes it takes us into uncharted territory. I'm going to tell you, Wanda and I, that would be my wife, if you don't know. Wanda and I have been at odds with other Christians a bunch of times in our lives. Because by prayer, sometimes a lot of it, we made decisions to walk where we believed with our whole hearts Jesus would have wanted us to walk. And I'm going to tell you, these decisions that we made to walk this path and not that path, those decisions were, I believe, saturated with the wisdom of God that we prayed for. and our best insight into what Jesus would do if he were in our shoes in that moment. And we were still judged, sometimes harshly, by our Christian friends. Listen to this. I'm not going to give a litany of my life here, but I want you to see this stuff is real, and it affects us, and it should affect all of us. It started early for Wanda and I. In 1976, was a year after we got married. Yeah. 1976, we were 22-year-old head residents of a girls' dormitory in a Christian college. Now, that's another story of why they were so dumb enough to hire us as this young couple that knew nothing. But we were hired to do that. And in the very first semester that we were there, understand, we were 22 years old. We heard from one of our resident assistants in the dormitories that a freshman girl in our dorm was pregnant and preparing to get an abortion. She was all of 18. 1,500 miles away from her home. And as we looked at it, we saw this potential epic firestorm out in front of her. She was there, and keeping that secret and not knowing what to do. But because of our personal convictions about the sacredness of human life, through the one girl that knew of her, we promised her we would protect her anonymity if she would give us the opportunity to talk to her about her decision to get an abortion. Later, we found out that our jobs were on the line if we didn't tell the administration of the school who she was, so they could deal with her appropriately. After about a week or so, through the grace of God, she had made a decision to keep her baby and to give it up for adoption. She was going to tell her parents what had happened. She was going to come clean with the school. We felt like we had participated in an act of love and righteousness that we had, that Wanda and I had done that. We didn't know what we were doing, but we knew that. Only to find out, get up one morning and find out through the one girl that knew about her that she had already left. She was going down to the local bus station in our town to buy a ticket to drive into downtown Los Angeles to go into a doctor's office who was going to perform an illegal abortion. And, you know, they talk about these kinds of things about, how ugly and bad abortion was in the early years. You've heard stories like that. Well, we lived it with her, where we literally feared for her life where she was going. And we went and we found her, and she had made up her mind. She was going to have the abortion, no matter what. And in that moment, we had to make a decision about what we would do. So we asked her to get in our car and that we would drive her to a safe and legal hospital. that would perform that act so at least she would be safe. Once everybody found out about that, I still don't know why we weren't fired. I don't. Because we had violated all kinds of protocol. But I will tell you, we were judged harshly. It was the hardest thing that we had ever gone through. Little did we know that it was just the beginning. See, when you pray honestly and say, Jesus, what would you have me do? Sometimes it's not easy. When we were just 24 years old, I got a job offer to go to a big mega church to be a youth pastor there. And I got to tell you, nobody in our sphere of friends and mentors and teachers, nobody. There was a group of about 50 that I went and asked, should I go to this church to be the youth pastor there? And every single one of them said, no, don't go. You won't fit. It will be a complete disaster. Well, everybody except two people in our lives. And they were the two that we probably respected the most. And both of them said to us, looked us right in the eyes and said, we believe this is what Jesus would have you do, is to go to this church. You know what we did? We went to the church. Against the advice and wisdom of others. And it wasn't like Facebook advice. It was like real people advice. Okay? They said, don't go. We did. In that church, serious fidelity and commitment to Christ. And this is in the early 1980s. Only those of you who lived through the 80s will completely understand what I'm talking about. But fidelity and commitment to Christ in that church that I was on staff. It was evaluated by your willingness to picket abortion clinics and be willing to be taken to jail for it. That was how they knew you were serious about following Jesus, if you were willing to do that. We prayerfully entered into that and believed that that is not what we should do. Because we didn't think Jesus would have us do that. We seriously arrived at that conclusion in that way. And if that wasn't enough, and I can tell you dozens and dozens of stories like this. 10 years later, we left that church. That was about 5 or 6 years before we ended up here, okay, on the timeline. We left that youth ministry to become missionaries. In part, to plant a church with some other young couples in the inner city of East San Diego that we believed needed a presence of Jesus there. It was a pretty dark and demonic community, I'll be honest. And among other things, we knew that would mean, it would require that we immerse ourselves and our two little boys into that culture. Our boys were, I don't know, how old were they? Maybe seven and 4, something like that. They were little. Chris was in elementary school and Corey was getting ready to go to school. We knew We knew that we had to immerse ourselves in that culture if we were going to be missionaries that could tell people about Jesus and be believed. We had to live with people. And so that meant for us enrolling our kids in the public school out on the big main street. It meant joining youth sports that were complete disasters. It meant church life with people that, I'm remembering right now. It was hard. It was hard. And many of our friends at the church that we were leaving, they accused us of sacrificing our own children on the altar of our own Christian idealism. They looked at us and said, "You are abusing your children by doing that to them." But we prayerfully believed it was what Jesus would have us do. Turned out to be one of the very, very best things that ever happened to our boys. And I could spend hours talking to you about what happened to them while we were there and what happened to us. But I promise you, we lost dear friends who no longer respected us because of what they thought we had done. Look, sometimes there is a deep cost for walking where we believe Jesus would have us walk. But there's always reward. Look, this is a pretty simple lesson today. And I don't know what you're going to do with it. I know what I did with it. But I'm just putting it in front of you. It's simple, but it is full of huge possibilities. If you're really willing to take the life and words of Jesus seriously. These things that we went through, and many others that we did in our life, were not entered into haphazardly. Some decisions we made throughout our life were difficult and painful. Some of them were judged so harshly by our closest friends and people we respected and people we thought respected us, only to find out they no longer did. Some of the stuff that we have done in the 30 years that we have been here, people have looked at us at North Point and went, "What are you thinking? Why would you ever do that? Why would you ever believe that? Why would you ever go in that direction?" And my only answer back to people is, we prayed and we continue to pray to know Jesus more, to know him better. And in that relationship with him, we have become convinced to do things that maybe others would not do. Look, I'm not talking to you about the decisions that you make. I'm talking to you today about how you make those decisions. How we have made those decisions. Simple question. Is this your prayer? Is this the prayer that you pray before you arrive at the conclusions in your life about what is right and wrong? Do you start here before you start digging in and researching? I want to do what Jesus would do. I want to think like Jesus would think. I want to treat people the way Jesus would treat people. For my money, that's the beginning of a relationship with Jesus. It's to follow him that closely, that you would dare to do what he would do. And what is so cool about this is that this is a prayer that the Bible promises God will answer when you pray for wisdom and when you pray for insight. So I am, as your friend and teacher of the moment, I care far less about your opinion on anything. Anything. What I care about the most is that you not ever make a step in any direction before you are thoroughly, completely filled with the knowledge of who Jesus is. And if you make a decision, whatever that decision is, based on that, guess what? We can be friends. We can be friends. We may fall on opposite sides of an issue. But if you are seeking the mind and heart of Jesus, and I am seeking the heart and mind of Jesus, do you know what? We are unified. Not in the decision, but in the process. And we can remain together because of that. This is a prayer that will always challenge you, always inspire you, and sometimes scare you to death. And answers may surprise you. But when you are with others who are praying that same prayer, honestly and faithfully, you can have amazing common ground. It's how unity in the body of Christ is supposed to work. It all starts and ends with Jesus. We take communion every Sunday, get this, and it's that moment where we lay down our opinions, we lay down the things that we think are right, and they may be, but we lay them down. You can find a nice little place next to you on the seat. Put them there. They'll be there in a few minutes. But for now, you lay them down because you need to be able to hold the cup and the bread. It is the cup and the bread of unity. Unity is based on Jesus. It's based on Jesus. So you need to follow him. Look for him. Listen to him. It's the cross that unites us. Some of these guys here now are going to walk by you and give you a tray. It'll pass in front of you, and you take the cup and the bread and spend a